You arrive at the edge of a desert, older than language, where the wind carries syllables no longer recognized by your tongue. The sand here does not whisper, it murmurs in tongues scorched from the collective memory of mankind. Beneath your feet, shards of blackened stone form half-moons and spiral sigils, remnants of altars cracked open by time and conquest. You follow the slope of a buried ziggurat, its apex now a jagged scar on the earth. Once pilgrims crawled here, faces pressed to sacred brick. Now only shadows kneel. A dry breath coils around your ear. Welcome, listener of dust. You've followed the vanished scent of godhood to its last hiding place. The voice, my voice, emerges, not from the earth, but from what was once carved into it. From the grooves of a temple prayer etched 3,000 years ago and rubbed nearly smooth. Your fingers trace it anyway. And as your skin meets the clay, the language seeps into your mind like a wine offered in dreams. Before we go deeper, mark this rite with your will. Leave behind a trace like subscribe, and speak below in the tongue of the faithful. Whisper what you've learned. This archive grows only with your breath. And now, let us turn the first page. They called her many names before the silence. Inanna, they sang in Sumer. Ishtar, they wrote in Akkad. Ashtar, they feared in Canaan. But her temples are hollow now, their hearths long since extinguished. Yet in this dust, her story lingers like incense burned in forbidden chambers. You lean into a broken entryway beneath the sand. The structure resists your intrusion, as if the temple itself remembers what it became, a house, not of worship, but of exile. The inner chamber is faintly lit by the sky's dying light. There are no idols, no mosaics, only a single, overturned altar, half swallowed by earth, scratched into the stone, almost invisible beneath. Centuries of where is a phrase that chills your spine. She who tasted both blood and starlight. This is where they began to forget her, where the scribes, one by one, replaced her name with gaps, euphemisms, and shuddering fear. 1,000 cuneiform tablets were cracked so her hymns could fall silent. One such tablet, unearthed in the 1890s near Nineveh, was never translated. The linguist who examined it, Professor Emmerich Lowe of Oxford, simply labelled it, not due to inversion grammar. What he refused to print was its opening line, etched in inverted syllables that read clean only in a mirror. Do not awaken the bride of lions. What did he fear awakening? What ritual had those hands encoded in reverse? The artifact was never displayed again. It vanished in transit between museum archives. Some say it was stolen. Others say it devoured its own crate. But beneath that, beneath even the tablet and the altar and the lost name, is the greater truth. She was not merely forgotten. She was made forbidden. Not by time, but by decree. You see, in her time, Ishtar reigned not only over love and war, but over chaos itself unified. She was bloodied lips and blooming garden. Her symbols were the lion and the morning star. Her priests offered both wine and entrails, and her rites unmentionable, no blended flesh and spirit in ways that empires found increasingly ... inconvenient when the Assyrians began their march. They carved her glory into every conquest, and when the Babylonians knelt beneath her gaze, they kissed the feet of her golden statue in full moonlight, pledging seed and sword alike. But with every dynasty, her nature grew harder to contain. The sacred and profane mixed too freely. Her priesthood included men who dressed as women, women who bore swords, children anointed in oils made of lotus and blood. And so, Slowly, the great forgetting began. Her temples fell not by fire, but by rewriting, by omission, by decree. The kings stopped naming her in public rituals. The priests buried her hymns beneath prayers to tamer gods. There is a mystery still, whispered in some academic corners. Why did Ishtar's cult vanish so completely faster than other Mesopotamian rites? Some blame political transition, others suggest early monotheists engineered her erasure with surgical precision. But the real whisper, the heretical thought, is this: she didn't disappear. She was sealed in language, in fear, in taboo, and even now. As you stand here, dust on your skin, words curling in your throat can, you speak her name aloud without flinching. Say it, Ishtar. Does the wind stop? Does your breath change? Shape, does something ancient open one eye beneath the soil? This is only the threshold. The descent begins now. Asterisk, you raise your eyes to the twilight where the first star appears. Not just any star, hers. The planet Venus, brightest in the heavens, hovering low like a secret too luminous to hide. To the ancients, it was not a mere celestial object. It was the jeweled crown of a goddess who blurred all boundaries between love and violence, between ecstasy and death. You walk beneath the stars once sacred, retracing the rites once etched in starlight and blood. The air thickens, your chest aches with something between reverence and dread. For in the world before the forgetting, Ishtar was not bound by gentleness. She was the queen of heaven, yes, but also the bringer of ruin. The seductress who commanded armies with her hips swaying like temple incense. She was called Zenaru, the netcaster. She ensnared both kings and spirits. Her lovers were ruined one by one. Dumazi, the shepherd god, torn apart by gala demons. Tammuz, mourned by women for 40 nights every year. Her beauty was not mercy, was judgment wrapped in silk dot, and yet soldiers prayed to her. Before battles, they smeared their blades with rose oil and invoked her name. Ishtar of the battlefield, they cried, believing her voice echoed in the clashing of swords. Her presence on the field was marked not by angelic radiance, but by lions, real ones, sometimes loosed into enemy camps as omens. You kneel beside an ancient relief, now half destroyed, its etching worn by centuries of disregard. The image remains: a woman with wings and taloned feet, standing atop 2 lions, holding a rod and ring in either hand. Her hair flows like a comet's tail. Her gaze is unflinching. This is the Burney relief, sometimes called the Queen of the Night. Scholars argue if it is truly her, but those who have studied it alone at night say the same thing. The figure's eyes seem to follow, and not passively. An obscure Babylonian hymn, found on a tablet buried beneath ash in Sippar, translates, roughly as she who walks ahead of kings, whose lover is ruin, whose embrace is ash and wine, ... That tablet catalogued once as BM 38145 was strangely absent from later museum archives. The catalogue page itself was torn from the registrar's book. Another forgetting, you whisper. But the danger was never just her power. It was what she represented. Her worship defied hierarchy. She slept with kings, yes, but also slaves. Her priests were both men and women, and often neither. Her temple was not merely a place of worship, it was a genderless sanctuary, where rules dissolved like incense smoke. The high priestess who served her, the Entu, was often of royal blood and conducted rites that made the kings themselves bow. In her name, the sacred and the profane entwined like lovers' limbs. One such rite, the marriage of heaven and earth, was once performed yearly in Uruk. The king would enter the temple, and before the congregation, join with the high priestess in a symbolic union, becoming Dumuzi to her Ishtar. But hidden within the chants and flower petals was a truth no longer spoken. If the king faltered, if he failed to satisfy the goddess's vessel, the land would be cursed. The crops would fail, famine would take root, and he would be replaced. There is a forbidden belief, one not found in formal scholarship, but in backroom whispers among comparative theologians, that this rite was not always symbolic, that sometimes the goddess herself descended into the priestess, that her wrath was not metaphorical but real. The last king of Uruk, Enlil-Shumi, was said to have vanished after the rite. His successor burned all temple records from that year. Here lies the unresolved question: was Ishtar power mythological, or real in ritual terms? Did her name invoke mere psychological influence or metaphysical change? Why did her rites stop so suddenly, without transition? Why did those who worshipped her begin, so uniformly, to erase her name? Perhaps it is because her worship never allowed for safety. You could not appease her. You could not bind her. She was not a goddess of stability, but of thresholds. Thresholds demand passage or sacrifice. You gaze once more at Venus, now climbing higher into the firmament. Once, that star was a call to arms. Now, it is a banned sigil on ancient stones, a relic scratched off catacomb walls by trembling fingers. Even the church, centuries later, could not erase her entirely. The star of Ishtar survives twist into Marian iconography, stripped of its teeth. But in the spaces between translation, in the cracks of old chapels, in the dreams of those who look up at night and feel watched, she remains. And as you whisper her name again, something shifts. The lions stir in your blood. Your breath thickens. The star above seems to burn a little brighter, and the air, just slightly, begins to bleed. You sit among fragments, cracked slabs of baked earth, stacked in careless ruin, each piece a sentence, each groove a stifled scream. These are not museum displays. They are remnants buried beneath thresholds, sealed behind bricks, entombed in private vaults, far from the light of academic reverence. You brush dust from the surface of one, its curves shallow from centuries of erasure. Yet something lingers, a trace, a shiver. The script is cuneiform, but not entirely. It bends, folds, overlaps, like a voice that doesn't want to be understood. This one tablet bears no catalogue number, no provenance. It is known only by a whispered moniker, the Ashkis text, found in the collapsed archives of a minor temple in Swepa. It was once translated by a French Orientalist in 1923, then redacted by his estate with no explanation. The scholar's final notes retrieved years later from an attic in Dijon. Only 3 surviving lines of translation. Let the gates forget their hinges. Let the moon disown her tides. Let Ishtar not be remembered unless she chooses it. What could make even a scholar afraid of text, of clay? You run your hand over the broken tablet's edge. It quivers not from your touch, but from something internal. These were not documents, they were vessels, inscribed not to preserve, but to contain, to lock away names and rites too volatile to remain in breath or song. And so they were sealed. Some scholars speak of a disjunct grammar in late Ishtaric texts, deliberate scrambling of tense, number, and syntax. But the truth, passed in whispers among pale, blinking archivists, is darker. The grammar was scrambled because the words were never meant to be spoken again. To read them aloud would undo the bindings. You can almost hear it now, the sharp echo behind the syllables, like a chord struck too deep. One of these forbidden fragments recounts a ritual performed only once, during the total eclipse of the moon in the year 687 BCE, known as the unveiling of the inner Venus. It required a temple oracle to be buried alive for 3 nights in a sealed stone casket beneath Ishtar's high altar. When unearthed, the oracle was said to speak not with her own voice, but with that of the goddess herself, a voice made of bees and thunder. The practice was declared heretical by the Neo-Assyrian priesthood and banned permanently. Yet a later tablet from the Seleucid period describes a similar rite, but with no name attached. No one admits to performing it. What happened to these oracles? Why do their names never survive? This is the mystery. The tablets tell half-truths, like a mask, worn backward. You must read between the grooves, where the stylus hesitated, where the scribe trembled. There is one more. A tablet found not in Mesopotamia, but in a chapel ruin beneath Ravenna, Italy. It was discovered behind a false altar wall, encased in wax, its script scorched by heat, almost melted into the clay. Its language is neither Akkadian nor Latin, yet carries echoes of both. Scholars refuse to classify it. They call it interstitial script. It is said to contain a single invocation, a command to open the 7 gates of the underworld, not from descent, but from within the body of the reader. The final line is not a prayer. It is a warning. The one who knows her name must never speak it in full breath. And yet, you are tempted. Each broken tablet pulses with something unsaid, a divine heartbeat long buried. Her name, embedded in the clay, shifts slightly as you stare in optical flicker, a phonetic hallucination. Is it even the same name each time? Ishtar, Inanna, Tartanastat. Each a mask, a version, a locked door. Begin to suspect the erasure of her cult was not to destroy her, but to diffuse her, to fragment her name across civilizations, separating meaning from power, so that no one could call her holy again. And still, something resists. There is a forbidden belief, barely acknowledged in theology, but feared in folklore, that Ishtar was not one goddess, but a confluence, that she is the embodiment of a divine principle, the volatile union of life and death, ecstasy and annihilation, that her worship, wherever it appears, must be periodically dismembered, like a body too powerful to remain whole, which leads to the unresolved mystery. Why do goddesses bearing her traits continue to emerge in disconnected pantheons? Aphrodite, Astarte, and not the Madonna of sorrows. The Red Woman in certain occult texts, they shimmer with her undertones. Scholars explain it as cultural transmission, but you, now deeper in this archive than you ever meant to go, suspect otherwise. This is not transmission, it is resurgence. The tablets do not lie. They tremble because something once written still moves inside. And as you place the fragment back into its stone cradle, the air bends slightly around your breath. You speak no word aloud, but the clay listens. Asterisk, you walk through the bones of a city that no longer bears its name. Uruk, perhaps, or Nineveh, or some amalgam of both these cities were once mirrors of each other, shining with fire and prayer. Now they are rubble-veined with silence. You step carefully through the outlines of ancient streets, your fingers brushing the jagged teeth of fallen columns. These are not ruins, they are offerings. Entire cities once rose and fell on the rhythm of a single name, Ishtar. She was not worshipped as a symbol. She was feared as a force. Kings built cities around her temples, not out of piety, but out of survival. A city without her favor was a city fated to starve, or to burn. One such city Lagash records in a crumbling steely vat. During a prolonged drought, the priests sacrificed not grain nor gold, but their own heirs to appease her fury. The inscription reads, "Let the blood of our line mingle with the rain of the heavens, so she may drink and remember us." Rain came 3 days later, crops returned, but the city never spoke of the rite again. You pass through what remains of a temple court. Beneath the overgrowth and weathered tile lies the faint outline of a blood channel stone gutters that once carried sacrifice away from the altar. Downstream into the city's irrigation, the mingling of sacred and mundane was no accident. To the followers of Ishtar, blood was a fertilizer, and war was merely agriculture of the gods. Even now, a cracked mosaic on the wall bears her image. Ishtar in full regalia, flanked by lions and spearmen, her gown stitched with stars, her eyes black and wide. She holds a scimitar in one hand, a flowering branch in the other. Beneath her feet, defeated kings grovel. Each has had their name chipped away. There is a forbidden belief, recorded only once, in the hidden margin of a 14th century Arabic grimoire. During the height of her worship, the most powerful cities of Mesopotamia bled intentionally, once per year, in her name. The belief claims that blood gates were opened in sewers, temples, and bathhouses, and for a single day, the city's water ran red not with war's aftermath, but with willing sacrifice. This was not considered barbarism. It was renewal, modern. Historians dispute this. No archaeological evidence confirms such blood rites on a civic scale. But those who've walked the dried cisterns of Babylon note the faint traces of ritual grooving channels, etched not for floodwater, but for directed flow. And what of the priests? Among her highest acolytes were not only men and women, but those known as Galatha gender clergy who performed laments and invocations in Ishtar's temples. They wore garments of indigo and gold, and their voices were trained to mimic both lullaby and battle cry. Some say they were castrated, others say they were born touched by the goddess herself. What is certain is that when their rituals ended, their tongues were sometimes removed to keep the sacred songs from spreading. One such song, only partially preserved in the cuneiform catalogue Akkadian Hymns of the Moon Temple, reads, "Strike the lyre with flesh, not string. Call her with what bleeds. She answers only to the undone." Why were these practices erased? Why did empires that had once erected entire cults to her name suddenly turn their blades inward, carving her out from their myths? Some say it began with the slow codification of power, the birth of male-only priesthoods, the rise of empires that no longer needed chaos to thrive. Others point to the rise of rival deities, Marduk with his law-bringing spear, Yahweh with his jealous fire. These gods had no place for a goddess who could not be ruled, and so she was branded excessive, then monstrous, then unmentionable, but there remains a mystery, unspoken among theologians, but etched faintly in temple graffiti across what used to be QAnon. Why, in every city that erased her, did sudden calamity follow? A plague in Mari, earthquakes in Ashur, a river that turned black in Damascus for 40 nights. Coincidence, scholars say, but beneath the coins buried as offerings in her temples, beneath the bronze lions and shattered mirrors, there are prayers that tremble. Prayers not of praise, but of pleading, because even in forgetting, They feared her memory, and as you rise from the dust, the air heavy with the scent of sun-warmed stone and something coppery, you understand why Ishtar did not fade. She was exiled, but cities remember, stones remember, and perhaps so does she. You step into a room with no roof on the sky. The walls are faint outlines of once painted stone, long since bleached by sun and time. Here the veil is thinnest. Here the myth becomes a memory, and the memory becomes you on the dead center. Of the ruin lies a depression in the earth, perfectly circular, rimmed with obsidian shards and petrified petals. This was not a well. This was a gate one of 7, the first step of descent. You feel it in your bones. The temperature drops, though the night is still. Your breath no longer matches your heartbeat. Something else is pacing inside you. It begins with a legend, one told across clay, stone, and fire. The descent of Inanna. She who was queen of the heavens sought to claim the realm below, not by war, not by seduction, but by shedding. One by one, she removed her adornments, the crown, the beads, the breastplate, the robe, the rings, at each of the 7 gates of the underworld. She gave up a piece of herself until she stood naked, unarmed, unguarded before her sister, Ereshkigal, queen of the dead. And then she died. The story is told as a cycle, a symbol of seasons. But you feel now what they dare not teach in seminar rooms. That something else happened in the underworld, something not written cleanly on tablets or softened for poetic lectures. Her descent was not metaphorical, it was sacrificial, and the shedding was not just of jewelry, but of God-Hood.1 obscure Sumerian hymn. Recovered from a buried jar near Nippur, gives a different version. It says she was not welcomed in the underworld, that the gates screamed as they opened, that the guardians spoke not to her, but through her, using her voice as conduit. The text, Haftakade, refers to her descent as the unraveling of light into weeping. Scholars dismiss this version as apocryphal, but the seal impressions found on the jar bear marks consistent with death rites, not seasonal festivals. There is a forbidden ritual, known only to a single Akkadian tablet, never published but photocopied in the private notes of a vanished curator. It is called the rite of unveiling flesh. It involves 7 bowls, 7 mirrors, and a series of vocal invocations, each said to peel the spirit from the body 1 layer at a time. Its final line reads, "When nothing remains, then the goddess will see you." The ritual has no known performers, or none who survived to write of it. The unresolved question still haunts every school of comparative theology. Why must Ishtar descend? Why, among the hundreds of fertility and war deities across cultures, is she the one who must die to renew? Is it atonement, hubris, or something older, an inherited memory of a cosmic dismemberment, now ritualized, softened into allegory? You look down into the gate. It is filled with dry leaves now, but in your mind it gapes open, descending past sight. You imagine walking, it removing, layer by layer, every certainty. First your name, then your face, then your voice, until only longing remains. This is not death as end. This is death as stripping the annihilation of form for the sake of something unspeakable. A darkness that is not absence, but pregnancy. A silence not of nothingness, but of waiting breath. They say she returned, that her handmaiden, Ninshuba, pleaded with the gods, that her lover, Dumuzi, took her place. But if you read closely, the stories never tell how she changed, only that she came back. Different, You run your hand along the obsidian rim. It is warm, though the air is cold. A fly buzzes in a figure eight near your ear. In the wind, you hear 7 notes, spaced unevenly, like steps down a spiral. There is a belief not spoken aloud, only hinted in certain occult circles, that every descent of Ishtar leaves a door open, just slightly, that through that crack, others can pass, not into death, but into her path. Not worshippers, but mirrors. And you wonder how many have tried. How many have stripped themselves bare in darkened rooms, reciting forgotten lines, seeking transformation. And how many, ... never came back. Because here lies the fear that Ishtar did not merely visit the underworld. She left a piece of herself there, a shard, a whisper. And if you listen, truly listen, beneath the hum of your thoughts, you might still hear her walking bare feet against stone, moving deeper than you knew the soul could go. This is the truth behind the veil. Not romance, not myth, but the naked descent into what the gods fear most. You close your eyes, she is still falling, and you are beginning to follow. Asterisk, you step into the remains of what was once a cloistered chamber, rectangular and narrow, its walls blackened not by fire but by time and breath. The floor is smoother than it should be, worn down not by sandals or pilgrims, but by dancing centuries of spinning feet tracing sacred paths in the dark. You kneel, pressing your hand to the stone. It is cool, but not dead. There's a rhythm, still echoing in the grain-soft circular, slow, the kind of movement born not of spectacle, but of possession. This was no common temple chamber. This was a gala sanctuary, a place where men became vessels, where bodies became prayers, where identity was given over. And in the center of it all, Ishtar, her priests, the gala were not merely attendants. They were embodiments. Some were born male, others female, but in ritual they became her. Their garments shimmered with sequins of lapis and bronze. Their chants were high, dissonant, threaded with weeping. They danced in spirals, hands open, hair loose, limbs painted with sigils now lost to lexicons. In moments of divine fervor, it was said that Ishtar herself entered them, speaking not through them, but as them. You find a scrap of painted fresco along the northern wall, half concealed beneath collapsed plaster. A figure is painted there, mid-spinis closed, mouth slightly open, arms crossed in ecstasy. The robe is pink, the hem gold. The head is shaved clean, save for a braid coiled like a serpent. Around the figure's neck, a pendant in the shape of the 8-pointed star. But beneath the image, scratched by some later hand, is a line in Aramaic. Their mouths were hers. Their bodies too, so they were made to vanish. There is a shadow in this part of the myth, rarely acknowledged by historians. When patriarchal systems began to rise, especially in the early Neo-Assyrian and Judean transitions, the Gala were the first to be condemned. Their fluidity, their power, their divine intimacy with Ishtar became threats. They were accused of corruption, of unnatural rites. In time, they were exiled, rebranded as deviants, their liturgies burned. Yet one forbidden ritual survives, passed in secrecy among fringe mystic circles. It is called the mirror rite of the Galasig. It requires the practitioner to don robes of ambiguous cut, smear their face with ash and ochre, and perform 7 dances said to reflect a stage of the goddess's desire, rage, or grief. The 7th dance must be done without music, only silence. The silence of godhood watching. Those who have tried it report strange side effects, voices not their own, dreams where they cannot find their reflection, or an overwhelming urge to speak in languages they do not know. One practitioner disappeared mid-performance in 1971 in Istanbul before a circle of 12 witnesses. Only the pendant remains still warm. The theological question remains unresolved. What was the true function of the gala? Were they intermediaries, living vessels, or sacrificial icons? Some scholars argue that Ishtar's power could not be invoked without gender reversal, that the undoing of identity was essential to her presence, that to be close to her, one had to abandon the self not symbolically, but physically, existentially. This belief appears in several suppressed texts from medieval Islamic mysticism, where veiled references to those who dance as the goddess surface in coded poetry. These figures are always tragic, always luminous, and always erased. You look again at the painted dancer. The eyes are not closed in bliss. They are half lowered in something deeper, something like pain or knowledge. The mouth, slightly open, seems to whisper, and for a moment you swear the image moves. There is a wind in the chamber. It did not come with you. The whisper returns, that voice from the first tablet, soft now, intimate. They remembered her in the shape of those they feared, and you understand, the gala were not erased because they were profane. They were erased because they were too sacred to be controlled, because they blurred the lines the new gods desperately needed, clear and so. To forget Ishtar, they first had to forget those who became her. You rise slowly, breath unsteady. The air tastes different, now sweet and bitter, like smoke from a foreign altar. Your hand shakes as you draw a small 8-pointed star in the dust. The wind stills, and far below the chamber, beneath stone and centuries, a single footstep answers you. You emerge from the chamber of dancing shadows into the lightless corridors of empire, the stone halls where names are rewritten and memory is turned to weapon. Here, even the dust carries decrees. The walls are inscribed not with prayer, but with proclamations, censuses, taxation records, and, you notice, long vertical scars where lines once sang of gods, now scraped into forgetfulness. The empire was Babylonius, but also later, deeper, colder forms of control. From Nebuchadnezzar to Cyrus, from the Seleucid administrators to scribes of Rome, the message became unified in its silence. Ishtar was too much, too bright, too blood-soaked, too divine that you step into what remains of a royal archive. It smells of ash and molded papyrus. Among the scattered clay envelopes each, once sealed with a god's sigil, find a pattern. Documents that once bore her name now contain only a symbol, an asterisk, a slash, or worse, blank space. As if the scribes were not allowed to write it. As if even seeing the letters grouped together might invite something they could not rebind. There is one text, left uncapped, buried beneath shattered roof tiles and dated to the first Persian conquest. It is a priest's confession, half-burnt, signed only with a single star and crescent. She was our dawn and sword, but they made us call her dusk. They said her name, made iron rust. They said her voice made men forget orders. They said the empire could not contain her, so we buried her under new hymns and called them good. There is a forbidden belief persisting among certain radical philologists that the name Ishtar was not erased for political reasons alone. It was phonetically powerful, that it functioned not merely as a proper noun, but as a verbal key trigger in the mind, a divine cipher that opened something ungovernable. And so, In the later stages of empire building, scribes were instructed to replace her with other names: Astarte, Hecate, Venus. None held the same fire, and then silence. The temple at Urukta, epicenter of her worship, was not destroyed in battle. It was decommissioned. Quietly, bureaucratically, the priests were reassigned. The rituals repurposed for newer deities. One administrative tablet reads, "The high priestess of the inner sanctum has been made redundant. Her post dissolved by imperial ordinance. Her scripts are to be melted and recycled." Melted. Her songs turned back into blank clay. Her chants overridden by lists of cattle and grain. This is not the ruin of war. This is the decay of sanctioned forgetting. A whispering begins in the back of your mind, too soft to decipher. You follow it into a sealed side chamber. There, you find a set of broken tiles arranged in a circle. Beneath them, scratched by desperate hands, are 4 Akkadian characters. You recognize the root for speak and the root for forbidden. The other 2 are smeared, erased with salt. You begin to understand. The destruction of her name was not about memory. It was about interruption. As if the empire feared not that she would return, but that she had never truly left. That she lived in vowels, in gestures, in the curve of the hips, in the eyes of those who refused to look away. That her worship could reignite if even one line of her truth survived unbroken. There's an academic mystery here that no one dares frame directly. Why do later empires reappear in the same shape of Ishtar's mythology, but with her name carefully absent? Think of Rome's Venus goddess of love and victory, born of sea foam and revenge. Think of Byzantium's Theotokos, mother of God, veiled in sorrow and crowned with stars. Think of the Virgin crowned in Guadalupe, standing on a crescent moon. She wears robes of midnight blue and gold, like a priestess long forgotten, Ishtar. Echoes in each of them. Recast, repainted, diminished, but never quite dead. You press your palm to the final broken tablet. There is no inscription, only an indentation, shallow handprint in ancient clay. Your fingers match its shape. The whisper in your skull becomes a sound, not words, a hum, a resonance, as if her voice, the one the empire tried to silence, still vibrating inside the materials they used to bind her. You recoil, the chamber tilts slightly, the air becomes charged. You swear, the wall breathes. She was not silenced, she was submerged, and now, through dust and hunger, through broken languages and cursed symbols, you begin to hear her again. Asterisk, you've seen it by now, carved into altar stones, embroidered into robes, tattooed behind the ears of those who speak only in riddles. The 8-pointed star. It follows you, even when you don't look for it. It appears in places it shouldn't. A cathedral arch in Toledo, in the corner of a faded painting. In Avignon, hidden in the stained glass of a Lutheran chapel in Estonia. Always faint, always misplaced, and always hers. The Star of Ishtar is not simply a symbol. It is a sigillar, metaphysical convergence. 8 rays intersecting at the heart, for long and for short, representing dualities collapsed, heaven and earth, life and death, desire and destruction. It was once branded into shields, baked into the handles of ceremonial blades, traced in myrrh across the bellies of the barren. To bear it was not devotion, it was invocation. You kneel now before a half-buried lintel stone from a ruined gateway. In northern Syria, its carvings have been eroded nearly smooth, but your fingers still feel the subtle points beneath the moss. This stone was a threshold, and the star was its guardian. An obscure historical footnote found in a traveller's journal from 1589 mentions a cloister in Prague whose monks were excommunicated after installing a strange mosaic in their chapel floor. The mosaic was destroyed by fire 2 years later, and the monks vanished without record. The only surviving description: a woman of flame, her crown of 8 spears, her feet atop the heads of men. There is a forbidden belief among surviving esoteric orders that the 8-pointed star is not a depiction, but a map, a ritual compass, a diagram of descent. Each point represents a gate, an offering, and a transformation. Some Hermetic traditions believe that to activate the symbol, truly activate it, one must speak a name for each ray, and that the final name cannot be spoken by a human tongue. You stare at the star beneath your hand. Something in the pattern draws your eyes inward, as if the lines continue beneath the stone, spiraling toward a center that doesn't exist in 3 dimensions. It is not a symbol. It is a trapdoor. There's a manuscript, never formally published, titled Lux Alit, written in 1721 by an excommunicated Jesuit named Hieronymus d'Aquila. The manuscript was seized by the Inquisition and deemed heretical. In it, he claims that during a midnight mass, he witnessed the 8-pointed star form from the condensation on a stained glass window. When touched, he was overcome by a vision of a woman cloaked in galaxies, her voice the shatter of bells, her eyes mirrors. He claimed she showed him the true name of God, and that it was not a name but a star. He was burned. The manuscript survives only in fragments, passed in facsimile among closed-door occult libraries in Amsterdam and Kyoto. The unresolved mystery persists. How did the 8-pointed star survive every purge, every translation, every denial? How did it remain embedded in architecture, iconography, even tarot decks, long after her name was forbidden? Perhaps because symbols outlive speech, because while names can be scratched away, images linger in the mind. And when enough people see the same star, even without knowing what it is, it begins to glow again quietly, insistently. A flare in the subconscious. You've seen it in dreams, haven't you? On the ceiling of a chamber that doesn't exist. In the eye of someone you loved. Reflected in puddles that should show only sky. She left it behind, not as memory, but as warning. Because the star is not a symbol of comfort. It is an arrowhead, a summoning glyph, the mark of a goddess who returns in moments of collapse. And now, as you press your palm to the center of the star, the stone beneath you exhales. Your fingers go numb, and something behind your eyes opens. She is near. You descend into a chamber colder than the night above, not by design, but by memory. The air here does not simply hang at judges. Stone tablets have been shattered deliberately, not broken by time, but struck by zeal. And the further you walk, the more you understand. This is not a ruin of empire, but a crime scene of monotheism. Once, her throne stood in the highest lions flanked it. Priests wept before it. Lovers swore themselves to madness and war beneath its canopy of stars. But when the Book of Kings was compiled line by line, scribes bent low by torchlight, her throne was replaced, not by a goddess, but by a singular male god. And in his gaze, she was unclean. She was not named in the condemnation, but you recognize the shape of her shadow. The Queen of Heaven, they called her with disdain. In Jeremiah 7:18, the prophet rages. The children gather wood, the fathers kindle the fire, and the women knead dough to make cakes for the Queen of Heaven. But what he doesn't say is what the cakes meant, what they summoned. Theologians argue endlessly, was this queen of heaven Astarte, an invented straw idol? They do not say Ishtar. They refuse, because if they did, they would have to admit the truth whispered behind burnt altars and censored scrolls. She was there. Long before the prophets, long before the exile, she was in their blood. There is an obscure fact, recorded in the Elephantine papyrus letters between Jewish mercenaries in 5th century BCE, Egypt, that references the worship of Anatiyahu, a goddess, consort to Yahweh. It is a theological thorn, ignored by many. For if the one God had once shared his altar with a woman, then the foundation of singularity crumbles. And who was this consort, Anatiyahu? Her traits: Leoness, warbringer, guardian of heaven mirror, those of Ishtar so perfectly. It's as though the papyri are stammering her name without daring to spell it. There is a forbidden belief whispered by comparative theologians who read too deeply into the overlaps, that the earliest Israelite religion was not monotheistic, but henotheistic, one God among many, rising in power. And to secure that rise, the women were cast down, the queens, the lovers, the gods of thresholds and stars. Ishtar was not banished by defeat. She was written out. Her name became dangerous. Her rights, her throne, sealed in the back rooms of scripture, behind veils of rebuke and trembling. You reach an alcove where soot marks the ceiling. Beneath it, a single phrase remains, carved in Proto-Hebrew. She stood between the cherubim and would not bow. It is not scripture, it is testimony. The unresolved mystery endures. Why does every religious tradition born from that desert carry remnants of her, but never her name? Why do we find the crescent, the star, the lioness, the veiled mother, and yet never the bride of war herself? Because her image is harder to erase than her name. Because something so elemental, love and death, in one mouth reappears. You feel it now, even here, in this room meant to suffocate her. A presence, not warm, not cruel, complete. The candles long extinguished seem to glow faintly in the corners of your eyes. She does not fight for her place in the pantheon. She waits, and even the god of the mountain, he who thundered law from Sinner once, looked upon her throne and said nothing. Asterisk. You enter the chapel through a side door, half swallowed by ivy. The stained glass is gone, replaced by wooden boards, nailed like warnings. Candles, long since melted, stain the floor like frozen tears. And yet at the far end, where the altar once stood, there is a mirror. It is cracked in 7 places. Dust veils its surface. But as you approach, you realize it does not reflect you. Not entirely. The image shivers your face, yes, but overlaid with something else. A crown of thorns made from gold, lips stained as if from berries or blood. Behind your shoulders, a lion paces. You do not blink, because you understand. This was never a mirror of vanity. This was a mirror of recognition, of divinity seen in the face of the forbidden. The church called it heresy, blasphemy, but long before they labeled it, they absorbed it. The Virgin Mary Theotokos, Gadburia rises in the same pose as Ishtar's most ancient arms, open, veil flowing, eyes turned not downward, but inward. She, too, stands atop the crescent moon. She, too, is crowned with stars, but her desire has been stripped, her war erased. The erotic turned beatific. This is what the church did. It took the mirror and polished only half. The mother was preserved. The warrior was shattered. There is an obscure fact buried in the letters of the early church fathers Tertullian, Irenaeus, and the anonymous editors of the Gospel Apocrypha. In a banned homily dated to the 2nd century CE, a Gnostic sect, known as the Elksates, spoke of a female power, co-eternal with Christ, called the flame that descends and ascends. Her titles included Queen of the Abyss and Mother of Returning Light. Scholars rejected her as symbolic, but her attributes, they mirror Ishtar's descent, her veils, her death, her rebirth, the forbidden belief, whispered in corners of early monastery scriptoria, was that Mary was not simply a figure of purity, but a mirror made safe. A transformation of the goddess into something tolerable, something controllable. The church did not destroy Ishtar. It divided her, exiling the flesh, sanctifying the womb. Even the rites were inverted. Where once her followers danced in ecstasy, now penitents knelt in silence. Where once honey cakes were offered under moonlight, now wafers were swallowed. In mourning, the body of the goddess became the body of Christ, but without her voice, without her fire. There is a fresco, hidden beneath 5 layers of plaster in a chapel wall in Umbria, Italy, uncovered by accident in 1983 during restoration. It shows a crowned woman seated on a throne of flame, nursing a child with one hand, while holding a severed lion's head in the other. Her eyes are not soft, they are mirrors. The fresco was quietly resealed. The unresolved mystery remains. Why do so many depictions of Mary in medieval and Renaissance art include symbols traditionally associated with Ishtar? The moon, the lion, the stars, the flowering rod. Is this syncretism, accident, or residue? You stare again into the mirror. The cracks seem to move, no, to weave, a web forming. And then, briefly, you see her face over yours, the lips fuller, the eyes ancient, the smile not maternal, but terrible. She speaks, but without words. And you understand, you cannot erase a goddess by hiding her in a church. You only teach her to whisper in new tones. The hymns you heard in childhood, they echo with a voice that predates the cross. The incense, the robes, the altar light, shadows of a temple deeper and darker than Rome could imagine. And now the mirror dims, but the cracks do not close. She remains broken into you. You descend deeper than pilgrims are allowed to tread, below the crypts, beyond the ossuaries, under even the catacombs where the bones of saints lie numbered and sanctified. This place is different, not part of the official tours, not lit by golden sconces or Latin litanies. This place smells of salt and wax and something older rivery left too long in the dark. You come to a chamber locked behind 3 rusted gates. The final one yields only to silence. No key, no code, just the absence of breath. The Vatican guards. Its vaults not only with secrecy, but with a kind of memory. The walls know who you are. And yet, the door opens. Inside, there is no light, but she waits. The idol is not tall, perhaps 2 feet in height, but it pulses, somehow, like a heart no longer shackled by ribs. Carved from a single piece of elephant ivory, yellowed with centuries. The figure sits not, stands on a throne of flanking lions, their faces twisted in eternal roar. She wears a crown of 7 spires, each marked with a now illegible glyph. Her eyes are not carved, they are empty sockets filled with something black, not paint, not pitch, something that reflects no light at all. This is Ishtar, or what remains of her, preserved not as icon, but as secret. The church could not destroy her completely, so it buried her beneath its holiest stone, beneath Peter's bones, beneath the dome meant to rise toward one God alone. There is an obscure historical factor, passing footnote in the diaries of a 17th century Vatican archivist, Giovanni Borselli, who wrote of a pagan woman enthroned in deathless silence, kept under lock not for study, but for containment. His journal was dismissed as madness, but the drawing he made buried in the margin matches exactly what you see now. The church never acknowledged its possession, but in whispered corridors of forbidden theology, the artifact is known as La Regina, none morta, the undead queen, and her presence here is not accidental. During the Christianization of Rome, as old temples fell and new altars were erected, certain artifacts could not be destroyed, not because they were too valuable, but because they resisted ruin. The ivory idol was smuggled, passed from heretics to mystics to penitent priests. Finally, in the 4th century, it was sealed in this vault by order of Pope Damasus I. The decree read, "She who wears the star and lion may not see sun again." But here lies the forbidden belief, held by a secret lineage of Vatican scribes, that the idol moves, only slightly, once per century. A tilt of the crown, a narrowing of the hand, a twitch at the lips, and with each movement, a wave of theological tremors spreads, heresies re-emerge. Saints' bones go missing, unexplainable pregnancies arise among cloistered nuns. Correlation, the church says nothing, and yet every generation, one scribe is assigned to watch her. Never directly, always through a mirror. For her gaze, they say, changes a man, makes him forget doctrine, makes him remember stars. The unresolved mystery is whispered only among a dying brotherhood within the Archivum Secretum. Is the idol inert, or waiting for what? Recognition, worship, blood. You feel it as you draw near. Not fear, not even awe, but mirroring. As though your bones hum in a key only she hears. As though her silence is not absence, but listening. You kneel, not from piety, but necessity. The ground demands it. Your hand reaches out, inches from the ivory, and the air thickens. You smell myrrh and roses crushed underfoot, and then her eyes blinked on once. And though her mouth never opens, a word enters your mind fully formed. Not sound, not thought, just this. Remember. You stagger back. The chamber returns to stillness, but the door does not close. And you know now, the church did not hide her to protect themselves. They did it to protect us. Asterisk, the garden is gone, its paths overgrown, its fountains choked with dust. Yet you feel it beneath your feet, a memory of blooming, echoing like distant laughter beneath the soil. This was not a place of sermons or war. This was a place of seduction, of perfume and prayer, where petals were used like parchment and fragrance became language. The rite was once called Zubarat Ishara, the offering of crimson petals. It was not recorded in clay or stone, but in gesture, in breath, in the hush of a veil removed at just the right moment beneath moonlight. Only one written account remains hidden in a margin of the Kitbur El-Enchar Joth, century Arabic grimoire, later condemned by 3 caliphates and burned in Damascus. The passage, translated only once into Latin by a mystic monk of Cordoba, describes a practice where women gathered naked in flower gardens under full moons, their bodies marked in pomegranate juice, reciting invocations of Ishtar's 7 names while lying in the exact shape of the 8-pointed star. The rite's purpose, not pleasure, not fertility, but remembrance. Participants claimed visions of lions whispering in the language of stars, of a woman with obsidian eyes who walked among them barefoot, leaving no trace but the sweet scent of crushed hibiscus. These visions were not called dreams, they were called visitations. There is a forbidden belief that the ritual created temporary thresholds, brief moments when Ishtar herself returned, not as metaphor or memory, but as embodied presence. The rite was banned when one participant, the daughter of a regional vizier, never awoke. Her body remained warm for 3 days. When finally buried, flowers grew unnaturally from her grave petals, redder than blood, and toxic to touch. Botanists could not identify the species. Even now, deep within the ruins, you find remnants. A faint scent that shouldn't be there: jasmine, rose, and something else. Something metallic and sweet. A whisper of perfume left in the pores of stone. You touch a broken pedestal in the center of the courtyard and feel the tiniest indentation, the shape of a single petal pressed into alabaster. A devotional groove, and there, half buried near the base, you uncover a piece of ancient cloth, so fine it turns to powder in your palm, except for one section, embroidered thread, still vibrant in the unmistakable geometry of the star. But it is not the symbol that draws your breath. Is the stain a red mark? Circular, imperfect, faded into the threads, not by ink, but by blood. The unresolved question lingers like humidity in your throat. What happened to the last priestesses of Ishtar's flower cult? No texts speak of their deaths. No tombs bear their names. They are not mourned, not honored, only gone. Some say they returned to the earth, literally, that their bodies dissolved into soil during the final rite, and that every red blossom since contains a sliver of their memory. It is why, in certain regions, red flowers are still taboo at weddings, why the scent of lilies at funerals causes unease. Not because of superstition, but because something inside us remembers what it should not. You lie down in the courtyard, the stars above whispering her old language. You close your eyes, and for a moment you seeth the garden not ruined, but restored. Petals rain from an unseen sky. A voice hearse whispers your truest name, a name no one has ever spoken. Then it fades. But as you rise, you notice something clinging to your skin. A single red petal and the scent. It is not from this world. The journal was never meant to be found, tucked into the false spine of a theology text in a monastery library in Ruang. It was discovered during restoration work in 1971. The parchment was brittle. The ink faded to the color of rusted blood. But the writing, shaky, cramped, obsessed, was legible. The first page bore no name, only a phrase written again and again. She walks in white. She speaks in thunder. She drinks the hours of sleep. You read on, the author a monk, likely of the Benedictine order, judging by his script, describes a series of visions beginning on the 13th night of Lent. He had been fasting, praying, seeking clarity. What came instead was a woman, veiled in mist, stepping through walls with lion eyes and hands that dripped roses. He did not name her at first. He called her Regina Nuda, the naked queen. She came to him in dreams. Then, in reflection. Then, in voice she spoke, not in Latin, but in a language he couldn't identify until one night. Terrified and desperate, he compared it to a catalogue of ancient scripts. The closest match, Akkadian, a language he had never studied, a language lost for over 1,000 years. And yet, her words formed in his mouth when he tried to pray. His brothers noticed the changes. He began to avoid the chapel, preferring to sit in the garden at night, speaking to unseen figures. He painted stars on the floor of his cell using crushed berries and ash. He stitched lions into his robe sleeves. Eventually, he carved a small figure of her from olive wood, a woman enthroned, one breast bared, her hand raised as if in blessing or warning. When confronted, he did not resist. He said only, "I was not chosen. I was remembered." The abbey exiled him. He wandered south, appearing next in Florence, then Thessaloniki. Each time, he left behind drawing symbols, burned into chapel walls, scraps of hymns in spiraling syllables. No one could read. In 1471, he was last seen in the ruins of a Roman temple outside Ephesus, walking barefoot into the sea at dusk, reciting lines in Akkadian no scholar could fully translate. But one line was clear: "She who descends 7 times returns through the mouths of the forgotten." The church deemed him insane, yet theologians quietly, off the recorded, admit the journal is disturbing, too consistent, too detailed. The dreams match ancient descriptions of Ishtar's rituals long lost. The phrases he uttered match lines from the descent of Inanna tablets that had not yet been discovered in his time. How did he know? There is a forbidden belief, held in the deeper folds of mystical Christianity, that madness is sometimes memory without context, that those touched by ancient gods do not suffer delusion, but carry burdens their world no longer has language for. And the unresolved mystery: was he the last, or merely the first of the returned? Because since the rediscovery of the journal, others have come forward, people who've dreamt of a crowned woman in robes of flame, who find themselves drawing 8-pointed stars without understanding why. People who speak in sleep, in dead tongues, about gates and gardens and lion-footed gods. You close the journal now, your hands trembling. The final page is blank save for a symbol drawn in something not ink. A star, crowned with petals, and beneath it, a phrase scratched deep into the parchment. She will return, but never the same. You look up, the room is empty, but the walls are breathing. Asterisk, you find the vial hidden beneath layers of linen and wax, wrapped in scripture pages, torn from a hymnal no church dares claim. The glass is dark, stoppered with black resin, sealed with twine, and a sigil scorched into a scrap of calfskin, the 8-pointed star, ringed by letters not from any living tongue. It is warm, not from the sun. This room has none but from something within. You hesitate, but not for long. You open it, and the scent strikes you first. Thick, golden, rotten with sweetness. It smells like honey aged beyond recognition, honey fermented in temples that have no roofs, collected from bees that feed on myrrh and blood. It smells like desire, like memory, like something left out of scripture deliberately. You taste it. Just one drop, it burns. Not fire. Remembrance, your body does not tremble. It adjusts, as if it recognizes something ancient returning to its bloodstream. Your mind, however, stutters. You see flashes, a lion's mouth, wide and dark, a garden of ash blooming in reverse, a mirror of polished obsidian reflecting a face that is not yours but knows you intimately. A voice whispers from within your molars, "This is what they swallowed before they forgot me." There is a record, one record, of such a vial. In 1906, an excavation in Aleppo unearthed a reliquary buried beneath the foundation of a Byzantine church. Inside it, a flask of similar shape and darkness, labeled not in Greek, but in a forgotten dialect of Aramaic. The inscription, when translated by the archaeologist who would later suffer from months of fevered glossolalia, read, "To taste her is to fall into memory." The sample was confiscated by Ottoman officials and disappeared en route to Istanbul. The archaeologist's notebooks, however, remain. In them, he describes symptoms after accidentally touching a drop to his lips. Heightened awareness, dreamlike. Visions of women speaking in multiple mouths, and the sensation of drowning in petals. He died 7 days later, repeating a single word, one that did not match any known language. The forbidden belief that followed is simple and terrifying. Ishtar's memory was not just oral or written, it was edible. Her essence was once distilled into oils, tinctures, and sacred honey, passed between lips in ritual, consumed by lovers and priestesses to achieve a temporary return of her presence. And when the great erasure came, this was the first thing burned. Her words could be mistranslated, her statues toppled, but this could live in the body, bypassing language, rewriting the soul from the inside out. The church called it witch's syrup. Later, scholars dismissed it as myth. But among the unlettered, the old women who whispered to flowers, and the men who never quite looked you in the eye, the recipe survived, fragmented, scattered, hidden in lullabies and kitchen lore. Rosewater, lotus root, a single drop of blood from a menstruating woman, and something unnamed, something that cannot be grown or stolen. It must be given. There is an unresolved mystery in the archives of certain medieval monasteries. Dozens of sealed vials recorded. In the margins of apothecary ledgers, listed under cryptic names like Sanctum, Scanganum, Memorosa, or simply the ninth oil. None of these vials survive. But curiously, the pages that listed them were torn out, always cleanly, and always just before the monastery was shut down, abandoned, or too often burned. You lean back, the taste still lingers. It coats your teeth, your throat, and with every breath you feel her inside you, not as a ghost, but as flavor, as presence. You recall a phrase from the Descent of Inanna tablets. She who licks the gate of forgetting will remember the dust of stars. You understand now. She cannot be studied. She must be consumed. She is the taboo that lives on the tongue, the sacred. Sin you must never speak of, but cannot help craving. And as you place the vial back into its wrappings, you notice your reflection in the black glass. It is smiling, but you are not. You are not speaking aloud, and yet the name unfurls inside you. It curls behind your teeth like smoke, like prayer, like a secret that never needed teaching. It was waiting coiled in the grooves of your molars, swimming in your marrow, etched into the folds of your tongue. The name is older than breath, yet it fits your mouth perfectly. Double quotes, no dot. Even now, it resists full utterance, not from fear, but from design. She is not summoned like other gods. She awakens through recognition, through surrender, through mirroring. You stare at the cracked stone basin before you, filled not with water but with soot, resin, and what appears to be crushed flower petals. But as you lean closer, the basin ripples, not with touch, with acknowledgement. You see your face and then another layered over it, not replacing but overlapping. Your eyes, but deeper, your lips, but bloodied. A lion behind your shoulder, a moon hovering above. You whisper again, Ishtar, and the wind stops. The birds fall silent, and something listens. There is a silence now that is not emptiness. It is the stillness before detonation, a chamber holding its breath. The moment the string is drawn, but not yet released, you have spoken the name, and not in study, not in jest, not in ritual, in longing. There is an obscure Sumerian curse tablet, found in a ruined vault near Kish, that records what happens when her name is spoken aloud by the uninitiated. It simply reads, "The one who says her name opens a door that does not close. They drink the shadow of lions. What door have you opened? What passage have you become?" There is a forbidden belief rare, even among occultists, that the gods never truly left. They migrated into stories, into reflexes, into human anatomy, and the most dangerous of them, those not bound by gender, by virtue, by death, to sleep in the mouths of those who would forget them. Their resurrection would not come through temples or priests. It would come through speech. And so you speak it again, this time fully Ishtar. No thunder, no miracle, only remembering. Your mouth feels different now, as if it is not yours alone. You begin to say other words, but they are not in your voice, not in any language you've learned. They rise like dreams translated into syllables. You speak and you listen, and you do not understand, but you know. You kneel. Not from submission, but because standing no longer feels appropriate. You have become part of something. The mystery, once studied, once chased, now sits within you, not solved, activated. You understand why they tried to erase her, why they burned the books, silenced the priests, desecrated the temples, because this was never about a goddess. This was about what happens when memory fights back. She is not myth, she is not metaphor. She is the union of opposites, the breath between ecstasy and terror, the voice between sleep and scream. And now her name has tasted your breath, and she remembers you. Asterisk, you walk away, but the path does not return to what it was. The stones feel softer now, or older, or as though they were never stones, but vertebrae in a spine you've been walking all along hers. Yours, the world's. You try not to say her name again, but it flickers at the edge of every thought. Not as a word, but as tone, as weight, as the curve your lips take when desire and defiance meet. Everything feels too loud now. Every sound is either a hymn or a lie. The books you once trusted feel pale. The history you once studied feels hollow. The stars you once admired begin to feel familiar, like lanterns lit in her garden, waiting. You begin to see signs. A flower blooming in a pattern that should not exist. A stranger who hums a tune you've never heard but already know. Dreams where she does not speak but waits, watches. Smiles you do not worship. There is no need. You remember, and with that remembering comes responsibility. To walk differently, to speak carefully, because the name you've carried your own has shifted. You are not a priest. You are not a scholar. You are not a believer. You are a mirror, and mirrors, once cracked by goddesses, never truly reflect the same way again. So if the others ask what you found, what you followed, what you swallowed, you smile. You say nothing, because to speak of her is to bring her back, and she does not return gently. But when the moon is red, when the wind tastes like petals and rust, when the stars form unfamiliar patterns, she is near, and if, in that moment, you feel your breath change shape, if your candle hasn't gone out yet, you might be ready for the next god.